The sound of metal crushing against asphalt still echoes in my mind, but it's not what haunts me most. What haunts me is the silence that followed. Not the silence of the empty street at 3 in the morning, but the silence in my son's voice when the doctor told him I might not make it through the night. "Mom's tough," he said, scrolling through his phone while I lay unconscious, machines keeping me breathing. "She'll pull through. She always does." I remember floating in and out of consciousness, hearing fragments of conversations. The nurses whispering about how lucky I was to be alive. The doctor explaining to Edward that the next 72 hours would be critical. And then, my son's voice, clearer than anything else in that fog of pain and medication. "I'm not canceling my trip for someone who's already lived enough." Those words cut deeper than any of my broken ribs. I kept my eyes closed, pretending to be unconscious, as he explained to his friend over the phone how he'd already paid for the beach house rental, how this trip to Cancun had been planned for months, how I would understand because I'd always taught him to live his life. "Besides," he continued, and I could hear him pacing beside my bed, "she's been talking about wanting to rest for years. Maybe this is her chance. Rest." As if lying in an ICU with 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a concussion was some kind of vacation I'd been craving. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, 58 years old, having spent the last 20 years of my life making sure Edward had everything he needed. I'd worked double shifts at the accounting firm to pay for his college. I'd co-signed his apartment lease when his credit wasn't good enough. I'd been his emergency contact, his financial backup, his emotional support system. And now, when I needed him most, I was just an inconvenience standing between him and his spring break plans. I heard him make the arrangements with a detached efficiency that broke my heart. He called my sister Linda to keep an eye on things while he was gone. He spoke to the nurse about visiting hours as if he was planning to be back in time for my discharge. He even had the audacity to lean down and kiss my forehead before leaving. "Get better, Mom," he whispered. "I'll bring you back something nice from Mexico." Something nice. Like a keychain or a t-shirt could make up for abandoning me when I was fighting for my life. After he left, the hospital room felt different. The steady beeping of the heart monitor became a rhythm of revelation. Linda came by every day, her eyes red with a mixture of worry and anger. She never said it outright, but I could see the questions in her expression. How could he leave? How could he choose a vacation over his mother's life? But as the days passed and my body slowly began to heal, something else began to heal too. Or perhaps it was breaking. Finally and completely. The illusion I'd been living under, the belief that my sacrifice and devotion had created a loving, grateful son, crumbled like the bones that had shattered in the accident. On the 4th day, when I was finally strong enough to stay awake for more than an hour at a time, I asked Linda to bring me my laptop. She thought I wanted to catch up on work emails or watch Netflix to pass the time. She had no idea I was about to set in motion something I should have done years ago. "Are you sure you're feeling up to this?" she asked, setting the laptop on the adjustable bed table. "You should be resting." "I've been resting for 58 years, I told her, my voice still hoarse from the breathing tube they'd removed the day before. "It's time to start living." Linda looked confused, but she didn't press. She stayed for another hour, chatting about her kids and her husband, filling the silence with the kind of comfortable family noise I'd been craving. After she left, I opened the laptop and began to type. First, I logged into my bank account. The account Edward didn't know about. The one I'd been secretly funding for the past 3 years with small transfers from my salary. Money I'd been saving for someday, for a retirement that seemed perpetually out of reach because I was always helping Edward with some crisis or another. The balance was more substantial than I'd remembered. $43,000. Not enough to retire on, but enough to make a statement. Enough to start over. Next, I pulled up the real estate website and looked at my house. The house I'd bought 25 years ago as a newlywed. The house where I'd raised Edward as a single mother after his father left. The house that had become both my sanctuary and my prison. I'd received calls from real estate agents over the years, cash offers from developers who wanted to tear down the old houses in my neighborhood and build condos. I'd always said no, thinking about Edward, about giving him stability, about having something to leave him someday. Now, as I stared at the estimated value on the screen, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: excitement. My phone buzzed with a text from Edward, a photo of him and his friends on a beach, drinks in hand, big smiles under a tropical sun. The message read, "Wish you were here. How are you feeling?" I stared at that photo for a long time. My son, healthy and happy and completely oblivious to the fact that his mother had nearly died while he was posing for selfies. His friends, young men I'd fed and housed and treated like my own children over the years, none of whom had thought to send even a get-well message. I typed back, "Feeling better every day. Enjoy your trip." But as I hit send, I was already composing a different kind of message. One that wouldn't be sent through text, but through actions. One that would teach Edward exactly what it meant when someone had lived enough. Because I realized, lying there in that hospital bed, that I hadn't been living at all. I'd been existing, sacrificing, giving pieces of myself away until there was almost nothing left. The accident hadn't nearly killed me. It had woken me up. And now, with Edward safely out of the country for another week, I had time to plan exactly how I was going to rise from the ashes of the woman I used to be. The woman who was about to disappear forever. The discharge papers felt heavier than they should have in my hands. Dr. Martinez had insisted I stay another day, concerned about sending me home alone, but I'd convinced him that Linda would be checking on me regularly. What I didn't tell him was that I had no intention of going home. At least, not to stay. Linda drove me back to the house that had been my entire world for 2 decades. As we pulled into the driveway, I saw it through different eyes. The peeling paint on the shutters I'd been meaning to fix for years. The overgrown garden I'd neglected while working overtime to pay Edward's expenses. The mailbox stuffed with bills I'd been too stressed to organize properly. "You sure you don't want me to stay tonight?" Linda asked, helping me up the front steps. My ribs still screamed with every movement, but the pain was nothing compared to the clarity it brought. "I need some time alone to process everything," I told her, which wasn't entirely a lie. I did need time to execute the plan that had been forming in my mind since that first night in the ICU. After Linda left, I stood in my living room and really looked around. Every piece of furniture told a story of sacrifice. The couch I'd bought secondhand because Edward needed a new laptop for school. The coffee table with ring stains from all the times his friends had used my house as their personal hangout spot, never thinking to use coasters. The family photos on the mantle, mostly of Edward at various stages of his life, with me always in the background, always supporting, always there. I walked to Edward's room, a shrine to my devotion that he hadn't lived in for 3 years. I'd kept it exactly as he'd left it, just in case he ever needed to come home. His high school trophies still lined the shelves. His bed was still made with the expensive sheets I'd bought him for graduation. His closet still held clothes he'd outgrown, but that I couldn't bring myself to donate. It was pathetic, really. A museum dedicated to a son who saw me as nothing more than a safety net he could take for granted. I pulled out my phone and called the first real estate agent who'd left me a card. Harrison Wilson, a sharp-dressed man who'd approached me at the grocery store 6 months ago. "Mrs. Patterson, this is unexpected. Are you ready to consider our offer?" "More than ready," I said, settling carefully into my desk chair. "But I have conditions. I need this done fast and I need it done quietly." "How fast are we talking?" "I need to close within 2 weeks." There was a pause. "That's aggressive. But for a cash sale, it's possible. Though you should know, quick sales usually mean accepting a lower offer. I'm not concerned about getting top dollar. I'm concerned about getting out." We talked for an hour. Harrison would handle everything: the inspections, the paperwork, even arranging for an estate sale company to clear out the furniture. The offer was $20,000 less than market value, but it was cash, and it was immediate. After hanging up, I opened my laptop and began the next phase. I logged into the bank account where Edward was an authorized user, the account I'd added him to when he'd turned 18, thinking it would teach him responsibility. Instead, it had taught him that my money was his money whenever he needed it. The statements told a story I'd been too blind to see. Cash withdrawals every few weeks, charges at expensive restaurants, a payment to a luxury hotel in Miami just last month. Money I'd assumed he was saving for his future. Money I'd deposited thinking I was helping him build financial security. I transferred everything, every penny, to my private account. Then I called the bank to have his access revoked. Ma'am, since he's an authorized user, we typically require both parties to be present for— He's out of the country, I interrupted. And this is my account. I'm the primary holder. I want him removed immediately. It took 3 phone calls and a visit to the branch. But by evening, Edward was no longer connected to my financial life. Next came the credit cards, the one I'd given him for emergencies that had somehow become his personal shopping account. I'd been paying the bills without really looking at them, assuming he was being responsible. The recent statements revealed a different truth. Expensive dinners, designer clothes, entertainment expenses that added up to more than my monthly salary. I canceled the card and requested a new one with a different number. Then I tackled something more personal. I went through every photo in the house, every memento, every reminder of the life I'd built around being Edward's mother. I kept a few precious memories, his first steps, his kindergarten graduation, moments when he'd been genuinely sweet and loving. The rest went into boxes for the estate sale. As I worked, memories flooded back. Not just the recent disappointments, but a pattern that stretched back years. The time he'd missed my birthday because he had a date. The graduation ceremony where I'd sat alone because he'd given his extra tickets to friends. The countless times I'd rearranged my schedule to accommodate his needs, while he'd never once asked about mine. I'd enabled this behavior, I realized. I'd been so afraid of losing him after his father left that I'd never set boundaries. I'd taught him that my love was unconditional and unlimited, available whenever he needed it and dismissible when he didn't. The accident had shown me exactly how dismissible I'd become. My phone rang around 10 p.m. Edward calling from some bar in Cancun. "Mom, how are you feeling? Are you home?" His voice was slurred, happy, carefree. In the background, I could hear music and laughter. "I'm home," I said. "How's your trip?" "Amazing. You should see this place. We're having such a good time. I wish you could be here. Well, I mean, when you're better, of course." Of course. When it was convenient for him. "Edward," I said carefully, "we need to talk when you get back. Is everything okay? You sound weird." "Everything's fine. I just think it's time we had an honest conversation about our relationship." "Our relationship?" He laughed. "Mom, you're being dramatic. We're fine. You know I love you, right?" Love. Such an easy word to say. Such a hard thing to actually demonstrate. "I know you think you do," I said. "Think I do? Mom, what's gotten into you? Is this about the trip? Because I told you I couldn't just cancel." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "Enjoy the rest of your vacation, Edward. We'll talk when you get back." I hung up before he could respond. Over the next few days, I continued my systematic dismantling of the life I'd known. I found a small apartment online, a furnished place near the coast, month-to-month lease, perfect for someone starting over. I arranged to have my mail forwarded there after the house sale closed. I also did something I'd never done before. I made plans that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs or schedules. I researched art classes, hiking groups, volunteer opportunities. I looked at travel packages for places I'd always wanted to see but never could because Edward might need something. Linda came by on Friday, bringing groceries and concern. "You seem different," she said, studying my face as I made us coffee. "I mean, considering what you've been through, you seem, I don't know, energized." "I feel awake," I told her. "For the first time in years, I feel completely awake." "That's good, I think. But Charlotte, what are you going to do about Edward? He can't just abandon you like that. You need to have a serious conversation with him." "Oh, we will," I said, thinking about the surprise waiting for him. "We definitely will." The real estate agent called that afternoon. We had a closing date, next Thursday, exactly 1 day after Edward was scheduled to return from Mexico. Perfect timing. As I hung up the phone, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. The bruises from the accident were fading, but something else had changed in my face. There was a strength there I hadn't seen in years, a determination that felt foreign and familiar at the same time. Edward had said I'd already lived enough. He was about to discover just how much living I had left to do, and how much he'd taken for granted was about to disappear forever. The morning Edward was supposed to return, I stood in what used to be my living room, watching strangers carry away the last pieces of furniture. The estate sale had been more successful than I'd anticipated. Apparently, my carefully curated life had value to other people, even if it had become worthless to my own son. "That's the last of it, ma'am," said Jenny, the estate sale coordinator. She handed me an envelope thick with cash. "You sure you don't want to keep anything else?" That rocking chair in the bedroom looked like it had sentimental value. I thought about the chair where I'd nursed Edward as a baby, where I'd rocked him through countless sleepless nights, where I'd sat reading him bedtime stories until he was too old to want them anymore. "I'm sure," I said. "Someone else can make new memories with it." After Jenny left, I walked through the empty house one final time. My footsteps echoed in rooms that had once been filled with the sounds of Edward growing up. His laughter, his music, his friends hanging out after school. Now the silence felt liberating, rather than lonely. I'd already moved my essentials to the coastal apartment I'd rented. It was small but bright, with windows that faced the ocean and a tiny balcony where I could drink my morning coffee while watching the sunrise. For the first time in 20 years, I'd chosen a place to live based on what I wanted, not what would be best for Edward. My phone buzzed with a text from him. "Flight delayed. Won't be home until tonight. Can you pick me up at the airport? Flight lands at 11:30 p.m. I stared at the message for a long moment. Even now, even after everything, his first instinct was to assume I'd be available whenever he needed me, that I'd drop everything to accommodate his schedule. I typed back, "I won't be available tonight. You'll need to make other arrangements." Within minutes, my phone was ringing. "Mom, what do you mean you won't be available? Where are you going to be?" "I have plans," I said simply. "Plans? What kind of plans? Are you feeling okay? You're acting really strange." "I'm acting like someone who has her own life," I replied. "You'll figure out how to get home. You're a grown man." "But I don't understand." "You will," I said, and hung up. I spent that evening in my new apartment, unpacking the few belongings I'd chosen to keep. As I arranged books on the shelf, books I'd bought but never had time to read because I was always busy managing Edward's life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation for my own future. Around midnight, my phone started buzzing incessantly. Text after text from Edward. "The house is dark. Where are you?" "Mom, your car isn't in the driveway. I'm getting worried. I used my key, but the locks are different." "What's going on?" "There's a for sale sign in the yard, but it says sold. This isn't funny anymore." "Mom, call me back right now." I turned off my phone and went to bed, sleeping more peacefully than I had in months. The next morning, Linda called my landline at the new apartment. "Charlotte, Edward has been calling me all night, completely panicked. He says the house is empty and you're missing." "What's going on?" "I'm not missing," I said calmly. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. He's on his way to my house right now. He's talking about calling the police, filing a missing person report. You need to call him. Tell him I'll meet him at the old house at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Tell him to bring his friend Jake, the one who was supposed to be his emergency contact while I was in the ICU, but somehow never got that message." "Charlotte, what are you doing?" What I should have done years ago. At exactly 2 o'clock, I pulled up to my former home. Edward was standing on the front porch with Jake, both of them looking confused and worried. When he saw me get out of my car, a car he didn't recognize, the reliable sedan I'd traded for something smaller and more economical, his relief was palpable. "Mom, thank God. What is going on? Why is the house empty? Where have you been?" I walked up to him slowly, still feeling the residual soreness from my injuries. He looked tan and relaxed from his vacation, completely healthy and carefree. The contrast wasn't lost on me. "Hello, Edward. How was Cancun?" "Mom, I don't care about Cancun right now. I want to know why our house is sold and why you disappeared without telling me." "Our house?" I repeated. "It was my house, Edward. My name on the deed, my mortgage payments for 25 years. And I sold it because I don't need that much space anymore. But where are we going to live?" The question hung in the air between us. We, as if it had never occurred to him that I might have a life that didn't revolve around being his backup plan. I have a place, I said. You'll need to figure out your own arrangements. Jake shifted uncomfortably beside him. Maybe I should go. No. Stay, I said. You're part of this conversation. Edward, do you remember what you said in the hospital while I was unconscious? His face went pale. You heard that? I heard everything. About how you weren't going to cancel your trip for someone who'd already lived enough. About how I'd understand because I taught you to live your life. Mom, I was stressed. I wasn't thinking clearly. You were thinking very clearly, I interrupted. You weighed your options and decided your vacation was more important than your mother's life. That's a very clear decision. It wasn't like that. The doctors said you were going to be fine. The doctors said I might not make it through the night. But you didn't stay to find out, did you? Edward looked at Jake, clearly hoping for support, but his friend was staring at the ground. Where's all my stuff? Edward asked, changing the subject. My room, my things? Sold with the house. The new owners wanted it furnished. You sold my things? My trophies? My clothes? Everything? I sold my things, I corrected. Things I bought, in my house, with my money. Just like I closed the bank account you'd been using as your personal ATM. Just like I canceled the credit card you'd maxed out on restaurant bills and shopping. The color drained from his face completely now. You can't do that. I need those accounts. How are you supposed to what? Live like an adult? Support yourself? Welcome to the real world, Edward. But Mom, I don't understand. What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go? I looked at this young man I'd raised, this person I'd sacrificed everything for, and felt something break inside my chest. Not my heart. That had been broken in the hospital. Something else. The last chain that had been holding me to a life that wasn't really mine. You're supposed to figure it out, I said. Just like I had to figure out how to survive after your father left. Just like I had to figure out how to raise you alone while working full-time. Just like I had to figure out how to pay for your college and your car, and your apartment and everything else you've needed over the years. That's different. You're my mother. It's your job. My job, I said quietly, was to raise you to be a decent human being who could take care of himself and others. Clearly, I failed. Jake finally spoke up. Edward, man, maybe you should what? I asked, turning to him. Maybe you should offer him a place to stay? Help him figure out his next steps? Support him the way he supported me when I was fighting for my life? Jake's silence was answer enough. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, reaching into my purse. I'm going to give you the number for the homeless shelter downtown. They have resources for people who need help getting back on their feet. I'm also going to give you the number for a job placement agency. They specialize in helping young adults who haven't quite figured out how to be responsible yet. You're kicking me out? You're making me homeless? I'm doing what you did to me in that hospital room, I said. I'm choosing my own life over yours. The difference is, you're healthy, you're young, and you have options. You just don't have me as an option anymore. I handed him the 2 business cards and started walking back to my car. Mom, wait! You can't just leave me like this. I turned back one last time. Watch me. As I drove away, I could see Edward in my rearview mirror, standing in front of the house that was no longer his home, holding 2 business cards and finally understanding what it meant when someone had lived enough. But this was just the beginning of his education. 3 months had passed since I'd left Edward standing in front of our old house, and I was living a life I barely recognized, in the best possible way. My mornings began with coffee on the balcony, watching fishing boats head out to sea. My evenings ended with walks along the beach, collecting shells and breathing air that tasted like freedom. I'd enrolled in a watercolor painting class, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. I'd joined a book club where we discussed novels I actually chose to read, not just self-help books about parenting or managing difficult relationships. I'd even started volunteering at a women's shelter, helping other women who were learning to rebuild their lives after giving too much of themselves away. My phone had been blissfully quiet. No crisis calls from Edward. No requests for money or favors or emergency rides across town. I'd changed my number and given the new one only to Linda and a few close friends. For the first time in decades, My time was truly my own. Linda visited every few weeks, initially worried about my drastic changes, but gradually coming to see the peace in my new life. "You look different," she said during one of her visits, as we sat on my tiny balcony watching the sunset. "Younger, somehow. I feel like I'm finally the age I'm supposed to be," I replied, instead of feeling ancient from carrying everyone else's burdens. "Have you heard anything about Edward?" I had, actually. Through Linda's careful questioning of mutual friends and neighbors, I'd learned that Edward had indeed stayed at the homeless shelter for a few nights before Jake's mother, a woman I'd helped with carpooling and school events for years, had taken pity on him and let him sleep on their couch. He'd found a job at a restaurant, waiting tables for the first time in his life. He was sharing a tiny apartment with 2 roommates and, according to Linda's sources, was struggling but surviving. "He's learning," I said simply. "Don't you think he's learned enough? Maybe it's time to..." "To what? Rescue him again? Enable him to go back to the way things were?" I shook my head. "Linda, I spent 20 years teaching him that no matter how badly he treated me, no matter how much he took me for granted, I would always be there to fix everything. It's going to take more than 3 months to undo that programming." What I didn't tell Linda was that I'd been watching Edward from a distance, not stalking him, but observing. I'd driven by the restaurant where he worked a few times, curious to see how he was adapting to actual responsibility. I'd seen him through the window, looking tired but focused, taking orders and clearing tables with a seriousness I'd never seen in him before. It was working. The lesson was sinking in. Then, on a Thursday evening in late October, there was a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Edward standing in the hallway, holding a small bouquet of flowers that looked like they'd come from the grocery store. He was thinner than when I'd last seen him, his clothes less expensive but cleaner. There was something different in his posture, less entitled, more uncertain. I considered not answering. I'd built a good life without him, and I wasn't sure I was ready to let him back into it. But something in his expression made me open the door. "Hello, Edward." "Hi, Mom." His voice was quieter than I remembered. Can I come in?" I stepped aside and let him enter. He looked around the small apartment, taking in the watercolor paintings I'd hung on the walls, the books stacked on every surface, the comfortable simplicity of a space designed for one person's happiness. "It's nice," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. "Peaceful. What do you want, Edward?" He held out the flowers, and I noticed his hands were rougher than they used to be, marked by the kind of work he'd never done before. I wanted to apologize, really apologize, not just say sorry because I need something. I took the flowers but didn't invite him to sit down. "I'm listening. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about what I said in the hospital." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I remembered from his childhood. "I was so angry when you left me there. I kept thinking about how unfair it was, how you were supposed to be my mother, how you were supposed to take care of me. And now? Now I realize how unfair I was. To you. For years." He looked directly at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Genuine remorse. "I worked out the math, Mom. How much money you spent on me over the years. How many hours you worked. How many things you gave up. I had no idea. You never asked. I never wanted to know. It was easier to just assume it was all automatic. Like you were a vending machine that dispensed whatever I needed." He winced at his own words. God, that sounds awful when I say it out loud. It was awful to live it. We stood there in silence for a moment. Then Edward said, "I want to pay you back." "With what money? You're making minimum wage at a restaurant." "I know it'll take time, maybe years, but I calculated what I owe you. The college tuition, the car payments, the credit card bills, all of it. It's about $87,000. The number hung between us. I hadn't expected him to actually quantify it. "I can't pay you back all at once," he continued, "but I can pay you back $50 a month. Maybe more as I get better jobs. I know it's not much, but..." "Edward," I interrupted him gently, "I don't want your money." He looked confused. "But I owe you. You owe me respect. You owe me acknowledgement of what I sacrificed for you. You owe me the understanding that I'm a person with my own needs and dreams, Not just your mother. I set the flowers on my small dining table. The money was never the point. Then what was the point? The point was teaching you that actions have consequences, that people aren't disposable. That love isn't something you can take for granted just because it's always been there. Edward nodded slowly. I think I'm starting to understand that. Living on my own, working for everything I need, it's hard. I never realized how hard you were working to make my life easy. And now? Now I'm grateful. And I'm sorry. And He struggled for the words. I'm proud of you, Mom, for choosing yourself, for not letting me treat you like that anymore. Something shifted in my chest. Not forgiveness, exactly, but recognition. This was growth. This was the man I'd hoped to raise, finally emerging from the entitled boy I'd accidentally created. How are you really doing? I asked. It's tough, he admitted. The apartment is tiny and my roommates are slobs. The restaurant job is exhausting and the customers can be terrible. I'm broke most of the time. He paused. But I'm also proud of myself for the first time in my life. I'm taking care of myself. I'm solving my own problems. It feels good. That's what I wanted for you. I know that now. He looked around the apartment again. Are you happy? Really happy? I considered the question. Was I happy? I thought about my painting class, my book club, my volunteer work. I thought about mornings when I woke up without anxiety about what crisis I'd need to handle that day. I thought about the satisfaction of making decisions based solely on what I wanted. Yes, I said. I really am. Good. You deserve to be happy. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Can I visit you again sometime? Not to ask for anything, just to talk? Maybe, I said. But Edward, understand this. If you come back here, it has to be as an adult visiting another adult. Not as a child expecting his mother to fix everything. Those days are over. I understand. He opened the door, then turned back. Mom, when you were in the hospital, and I said you'd already lived enough, I was wrong. You hadn't lived at all. You'd just been taking care of me. After he left, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching the moon reflect on the water. For the first time since the accident, I felt something like peace about my relationship with my son. But I also knew this was just the beginning. Real change took time, and trust took even longer to rebuild. The question was, would Edward prove that this transformation was real, or would he eventually revert to the boy who thought his mother's world should revolve around him? Only time would tell. But for now, I was content to wait and see. From the safety of my own life, lived on my own terms. 2 years had passed since Edward's first visit to my apartment. In that time, our relationship had slowly evolved into something I'd never thought possible. A genuine friendship between two adults who respected each other's boundaries. He visited once a month, always calling first, always bringing something small but thoughtful. A book he thought I'd enjoy. Coffee from a local roaster he'd discovered. Sometimes just his presence and good conversation. He'd been promoted to assistant manager at the restaurant and had moved into his own small apartment. More importantly, he'd started dating a woman named Claire, who seemed to bring out his best qualities. His humor, his intelligence, the kindness I'd always known was buried under years of entitlement. I was proud of the man he'd become, but I never let myself forget the lesson we'd both learned. People can only change if they truly want to, and change has to be sustained over time to mean anything. That's why the phone call at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday in March shattered me completely. Mrs. Patterson, this is Officer Rodriguez with the state police. I'm calling about your son, Edward. The words that followed felt like they were coming from underwater. Car accident. High-speed collision. Racing with a friend on a deserted stretch of highway outside the city. Edward had lost control trying to pass another car. He'd been pronounced dead at the scene. I sat in my bed, holding the phone long after the officer had hung up, staring out at the ocean that had become my sanctuary. The irony wasn't lost on me. After everything we'd been through, after all the growth and healing and rebuilding, it was Edward's own reckless choice that had taken him away. The funeral was small. Claire was there, crying the kind of deep, soul-wrenching tears that only come from losing someone you truly love. Linda held my hand throughout the service. A few of Edward's co-workers attended, along with Jake and some other friends from his childhood. What struck me most was how many people spoke about the Edward they'd known in these past 2 years. Responsible, funny, generous with his time and attention. The manager from his restaurant talked about how Edward had started a program to help other young employees learn financial literacy. Claire spoke about his dreams of opening his own place someday, about how he'd talked about wanting to make me proud. "He changed so much," she said to me after the service. "He told me about what happened between you two, about how you forced him to grow up. He said it was the best thing you ever did for him, even though it nearly broke both of you." I nodded, unable to speak. Because that's what made this loss so devastating. Edward had become exactly the person I'd always hoped he could be, and now he was gone. In the days that followed, I found myself thinking about the cruel mathematics of parenthood. I'd spent 20 years raising him, 3 years teaching him to be independent, and 2 years enjoying the man he'd become. 25 years of my life centered around this person who was now just memories and regrets. But then something unexpected happened. Claire came to visit me a week after the funeral. "I found something in Edward's apartment," she said, pulling out an envelope with my name written on it in his familiar handwriting. "He wrote this after your first conversation 2 years ago, but he never sent it. I think he was waiting for the right time." I opened the envelope with trembling hands. "Mom, I know I can't undo the years of taking you for granted. I know I can't erase the words I said in the hospital or the selfishness that defined our relationship for so long. But I want you to know that losing you, really losing you, not just having you pull back but having you disappear from my life completely, taught me more about love than anything else ever could. Real love isn't about always being there no matter what. Real love sometimes means stepping back and letting someone fall so they can learn to stand on their own. Real love means setting boundaries and sticking to them, even when it hurts. You loved me enough to let me hate you for a while. You loved me enough to let me struggle and fail and figure things out for myself. You loved me enough to choose your own happiness when I had proven I didn't deserve to be part of it. That kind of love, tough love, real love, is the greatest gift you ever gave me. Greater than all the money you spent or the sacrifices you made or the years you devoted to making my life easier. I'm not writing this letter to ask for anything or to try to speed up whatever healing needs to happen between us. I'm writing it because I need you to know that I finally understand what it means to truly love someone. And I love you, Mom. Not because you're my mother, but because you're an incredible woman who deserves respect and admiration and joy. I hope someday I can love someone else the way you loved me, completely, but not unconditionally, with boundaries. With respect for myself and for them. Thank you for refusing to enable me anymore. Thank you for choosing yourself. Thank you for teaching me that love without accountability isn't really love at all. I'm proud to be your son, and I hope I can spend the rest of my life proving that your hard work wasn't wasted. Love, Edward P.S. I've been putting aside money every month, not to pay you back, because I know that's not what you want, but to donate to the women's shelter where you volunteer. I figured you'd approve of helping other women learn to choose themselves. I read the letter 3 times before the tears finally came. Not tears of grief, exactly, but tears of completion. Edward had understood. He'd really, truly understood. Claire stayed with me while I cried, and then she told me something that Edward had apparently never mentioned. He was planning to propose to me next month, she said. He'd been saving for a ring, working extra shifts. He wanted to do it right. Ask your permission first. Plan something special. He said he'd learned from watching you that love required effort and intention, not just good feelings. He would have made a good husband, I said, meaning it. He would have. And a good father, I think. He talked about wanting kids but wanting to make sure he could be the kind of parent you were, present and involved, but also strong enough to let them fail when they needed to. After Claire left, I sat on my balcony as the sun set over the water, holding Edward's letter and thinking about the strange, painful, beautiful journey we'd traveled together. He'd been wrong about one thing in his letter. My hard work hadn't been wasted. The proof was in the man he'd become in those final 2 years. Responsible, caring, capable of genuine love and real remorse. The proof was in the relationships he'd built, the people he'd helped, the woman who'd loved him and been loved by him in return. The tragedy wasn't that he'd died young. The tragedy would have been if he'd lived his whole life as the entitled, selfish person he'd been at 25, never growing, never changing, never understanding what real love looked like. Instead, he'd learned. He'd grown. He'd become someone worth grieving. 6 months later, I received a call from the women's shelter where I volunteered. They wanted to establish a scholarship program in Edward's name, funded by the money he'd been setting aside. The program would help single mothers go back to school or learn job skills, giving them the tools to build independent lives. Your son apparently left instructions about this, the director told me. He wanted it to be for women who were learning to choose themselves, just like his mother had. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Edward had given me one final gift. He'd shown me that even when love requires the hardest choices, even when it means stepping back and letting someone struggle, it can still transform lives. He'd also shown me that the lessons we teach our children don't die with them. They ripple outward, touching other lives, creating change we may never see. I never got to see Edward become a husband or a father. I never got to watch him build the restaurant he'd dreamed of, or grow old with the woman he loved. But I got something almost as precious. I got to see him become the man I'd always known he could be. I got to know that my love, difficult, boundaried, transformative love, had worked. And in the end, that knowledge was enough to carry me forward into whatever came next, secure in the understanding that sometimes the greatest act of love is teaching someone they don't need you to survive, even if it breaks your heart to do it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from.